Let me just test my voice here. আমার কথা কি শোনা যাচ্ছে?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Welcome again to all the participants to the workshop organized by Jadavpur University, JAIR, and the School of International Relations and Strategic Studies. Today's topic is Unveiling the Secrets of Data, Analysis and Interpretation. And our esteemed speaker for the day is Professor Gautam Gupta. Sir, on behalf of the school and JIR, I welcome you. And for the participants, I would like to put forward that we are honored to have with us Professor Gautam Gupta, a distinguished academic with over 30 years of teaching experience. He holds a PhD from the University of Florida, USA. Throughout his academic journey, Professor Gupta has been associated with Jadavpur University in Kolkata, where he has held various positions, including lecturer, reader, and eventually professor in the Department of Economics. His extensive research interests encompass environmental economics and valuation of non-market services, experimental economics, and development economics. Professor Gupta has an impressive record of publications in reputed journals, covering a wide range of topics within the field. His dedication to advancing knowledge in the field is reflected in his authored and co-authored works. I welcome Sir on behalf of JIR and School of International Relations and Strategic Studies and would request you to take charge of the lecture here onwards. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. So we are going to talk about gathering of data, analysis and interpretation of data. Now, I beg your indulgence because this talk is being organized by the School of International Relations and Strategic Studies, whereas I come from an economics background. And therefore, whether you like it or not, most of my reflections will be economics in nature, because that's what I know best. I can't say, even though I have been a member of the academic committee of the School of International Relations and Strategic Studies for several years, I can't say that I know very much about international relations. I do know a little bit about strategic studies, and that will also reflect in my talk today. So here goes. Now, talking of social sciences in general, and economics or strategic studies in particular, the development of these disciplines has been a journey. This journey mostly begins in the year 1800 or nearabouts, 1790. And in the beginning thinkers, the early thinkers in these subjects, economics in particular, strategic studies also, they mainly relied on introspection. So they would contrive a situation. They would describe a situation in which they would say, let's say, so and so is happening. And then they would go on to introspect. And by introspection, they would try to show what a particular agent, a decision-making agent, whether economic agent or otherwise, is likely to do in these circumstances. I hope I'm still audible.
Yes,
I
sir.
hope people can hear me. Okay. So introspection was the main tool. And in order to support these introspections, they would use examples. I'm talking about in the field of economics, say David Ricardo, Bentham, John Stuart Mill, James Stuart Mill, Karl Marx. These are the people who who I have in mind, and they would give examples. And sometimes these examples would be actual real life examples, examples of information that they have collected from somewhere. And sometimes these would be also imagined examples. Supposing I do this, and then supposing you do this, and then the outcome is this. So that kind of examples would support their theory building. Okay. And then in the during the 1930s, this one step up was taken by many important thinkers like um, Marshall, like Jean-Baptiste Say, by Wilfredo Pareto. They took some steps which involved building models. So, these model building exercises would be somewhat more general. So it would not be confined to a particular example, because examples can only be very particular. One can always, turn around and say, okay, you have given this example, but I can create a counter example in which your theory will not be valid. So either from real life, I can draw an example where this didn't happen, or I can also construct an example which will show that your theory doesn't work. So in order to counteract such, bantering, so to speak, these people, Marshall and Walra and Pareto, they started constructing models. And eventually a bit of mathematics also crept into these models, so that the models were more structured and the analysis was based upon some logical reasoning, which yielded some results. And they held, or they claimed, that these results um, are of more general validity. You see, the one thing about the search for truth, and this is a philosophical point I want to make at the very beginning, is that when we say, okay, so we are seeing several things at the same time, right? We are seeing this, we are seeing that, we are seeing the other. So what is the truth? And the answer to the road to finding the truth is actually repeated observations, repeated observations. So, I mean, I'll just give you a very lay example. We know that agricultural productivity in the district of Bardhaman in West Bengal is higher than the agricultural productivity in the district of Purulia. However, many ways you measure agricultural productivity. There are many ways to measure agricultural productivity, but this is generally accepted. Now, how do we know that? Because I can find you one particular field in Purulia which is more productive than a corresponding field in Bardhaman. You get my drift? So then I can always turn around and say, here, I have this 1 acre plot in Purulia, and that's producing 3 crops a year, and that's producing so much value. And I have this other 1 acre plot in Bardhaman, which is producing so many crops and so much value. And clearly the one in Purulia is doing better. So it is only when this study is repeated over and over and over again that every time Bardhaman comes out on top, or at least most of the time, that we conclude that the agricultural productivity in Bardhaman is better than the agricultural productivity in Purulia. So that's one of the things that data does, is it yields itself to repeated observations. Now, coming back to the point I was making earlier. So what do we have now? We have introspection, and we have also examples supporting these introspections. And subsequently, we have theoretical models. Now, these itself, and these theoretical models are also actually supported by introspections, but they're more structured, and therefore their conclusions are supposed to be more generalized, right? Now, we are of the area of social sciences. Now, this word is very important. On the one hand, Social means we are dealing with people. Okay. So our decision makers are people. And the other aspect of this is the word sciences, in which, in order to be to qualify as a science, our results have to be of a general, has to have general validity. So you can't say, you know, this is valid for this particular situation. So it has to be valid for, the result has to be valid for all similar situations across the board. So that is what makes it a science. Now, obviously, in order to qualify as a science, introspection, examples, model building itself is not enough. And this is where data comes in. So the first thing you do is you collect data and you analyze data and you show what you have claimed in theory is also validated by data. Okay. Now, here, one important distinction has to be made between data that is collected by social scientists and data that is collected by people in the pure sciences like physics and chemistry. Because in the pure sciences, physics, chemistry, etc., the thing that is being observed is an inanimate object. It may be an atom, it may be a molecule, it may be a compound, and the person taking the observations and therefore creating data is a human being, and between the atom and the human being is a machine. So it may be a spectrophotometer, it may be a microscope. So that is when so there is an inanimate object at one end, there is a machine in the middle, and there is a human being at the other end. This is how pure sciences operate. Okay. In social sciences, the person doing the observing is a human being, and the thing that is being observed is also a human being. So this is what makes life very complicated for collecting data in social sciences. So every care has to be taken to make sure, and please listen to this very carefully, that the act of observing does not affect or alter the observation. Okay? So the fact that I am looking at you will not make you behave differently than if I was not looking at you. This is very important for social sciences. Now, such data where the fact that I'm looking at you does not alter your behavior at all is called secondary data. What is secondary data? Secondary data is data collected by some authority or body other than the investigator. So I'll give you two examples. I'll give you two examples. One is financial services. So every time you go to a bank and maybe you deposit some money, maybe you take out some money, maybe you take a loan, maybe you repay that loan, maybe you open a fresh account, a record of that transaction is kept by the bank. And for the bank's own purpose, and for their own purpose, the bank will aggregate this data. So total deposits opened, total loans taken, total percentage of loans repaid. So these will be aggregated at the regional level, at the national level, and reported to the Reserve Bank of India. Now, if you can get your hand on this data, then you can maybe test out many theories regarding the financial behavior of people, their savings behavior, their investment behavior, their loan taking behavior, their default behavior. So that is one example where this is secondary data this data is considered to be very pure and uncontaminated, because when you go to the bank, you either deposit some money or take out some money or take a loan or repay a loan. You are not aware of the fact that you are being observed. That this observation will then become part of somebody else's research investigation. Okay? So that is why this is considered to be very uncontaminated data and very reliable data. Another example would be, say, international trade. So every time a company in India sells something abroad, or a company in India buys something from abroad, the freight manifest will show what is being shipped and what is its value, because taxes have to be paid. So all these are recorded, and these are all reported at the national level to the Ministry of Trade and External Affairs, and those ministries also then put it out in the public domain. And you can, if you're a trade specialist, you can use this data to check out many theories of international trade that already exist. Okay, so these are many examples, but I'm just giving you two, and this is secondary data. Now, where is the problem? The problem is that oftentimes you are researching something, that data for which is either not available or not available in the secondary sense in the form that you want. Okay, this is a stumbling block, and the way to get around that is to go for the collection of what we call primary data. Now, primary data can be either subjective or objective. Now, in political science, I believe a lot of subjective primary data is collected. What is subjective? Subjective is where you interview people, ask their opinion. Then there's something called focus group discussions, where you get a group of experts in a room, you put them together, and you ask them some questions, and they have to answer those questions, and you make a record of those questions. So these are largely in the opinion form, and then you can have field visits where you sort of meander and collect information at random. So this is subjective primary information. Primary meaning, I forgot to define primary. Primary meaning information or data that is being collected by the investigator for his or her own purpose. This is different from the bank example or the trade example that I gave, where somebody else is collecting the data and somebody else is making use of it. Here, if I am the investigator, then I go about collecting the information myself, and having collected the information, I then go about using it, analyzing it, structuring it, analyzing it, and then interpreting it to support some theory or theories of mine. Okay. Now, the more objective kind of primary data collection is what would be called a field survey. Now, how do you go about doing a field survey? First of all, you need to decide who or what is your sample. In a field survey, you cannot, unlike a census, in a field survey, you cannot cover everything and everybody. So you have to have what is known as a representative sample. So you need to decide who or what is your representative sample. For this purpose, you may select some households. These households may be selected from a voters list. A voter list is usually very reliable in giving you a sample. So you take a voter list and you select every 10th household. Okay. So if you have a voter list of some 5,000 people, then you have a sample of 500. Now you can do two things. You can either just take a plain sample or you can categorize it. So you might want to categorize it in terms of income. So stratify it. It's called stratification. So you can stratify it in maybe 4 parts: the very rich, the not so rich, the middle, and the poor. And provided you have information about the income of these people, and then you have a sample, and then you have a stratified sample. Next, you need to have a questionnaire. Now, here is where structuring becomes very important. I have seen in my lifetime many badly designed questionnaires. Let me give you an example of what a badly designed questionnaire is. First of all, you need to meander. What is meandering? Meandering is walking around in your field, talking to people, and deciding what are the important questions to ask. So, what is your research focus? Where are you going with this? Once you do that, then you sit down and structure a questionnaire. And that questionnaire has to be as numerically codifiable as possible. So you should avoid open-ended questions. Like, for example, if you have questions like, do you think people, supposing you're doing a survey on children's health, you should avoid questions like, do you think children are more healthy today than they were 5 years ago? Now, this is a question that is quite completely useless in terms of gathering data. Because some people will say, yeah, children are more healthy because there are more vaccines and more medicines. And some people will say, no, even though there are more medicines and more vaccines, our food and drink contains many impurities and pesticides, so children get sick quite easily. So you are neither here nor there, right? So you have a mother with 2 children. So you ask them specific questions about how many children do you have? How many times did they fall sick in the last 1 year? How much money did you spend taking them to a doctor? How much money did you spend buying medicines for them? How many days did you have to miss work because your children were sick? So all these questions have a numerical answer. And I'm emphasizing this, that the more numerical answers you have, either numerical answers or yes and no. Yes and no can be interpreted as a 1 or 0. So that is also numerical. Now, there are 2 problems with a primary survey, and I would like to just briefly stop for one half minute. So there are 2 problems here. One problem is that people are often unwilling to give correct answers to the questions you are asking. In my experience, and this is also there in Ashok Rudro's Land, Labor and Rural Poverty, Ashok Rudro being one of the leading figures in economics who led surveys, is that, for example, in rural India, people are unwilling to disclose income or land holding. Okay. Because there is this deep-rooted belief that somehow the government is going to become aware of these, how much land they are holding and how much income they are earning, and somehow they'll come around and tax these. So they'll never they'll be very fishy about replying to questions about income or land holdings. Now there's a way to go around that. If you ask them not the income but their family expenditure, people are very happy to talk about family expenditure. We have to spend so much money buying food, and then so much money for clothing, and so much money for medicines, and then there is money for travel. My son travels to work. So then you can add all this up and you can figure out what is the consumption expenditure. From that, you can extrapolate the income. That consumption expenditure would be roughly 80-85% of income. Similarly, for land holdings, you don't ask land holdings, but you ask for crop production. So you ask them about the agriculture. So what crops are you producing nowadays? How much crop is being produced? How much did you sell? How much did you keep for yourself? And from there, you can surmise how much land that person is holding because you know the average productivity of the land in that area. So that's one problem, that people are unwilling to disclose certain information. The other kind of information people are unwilling to disclose, for example, is in a health survey, people are unwilling to disclose, say, information about HIV, AIDS. People are unwilling to disclose information about sexually transmitted diseases. So they will not be truthful about uh, reporting or recording these. So this is one side of it, and one has to be very, very, painfully aware of the fact that this is one has to work around this in a primary survey. The second aspect of a primary survey, which is a problem, is the ability to recall. Because oftentimes you have to depend on a person's recall, the ability to remember what had happened at that point of time. Now, again, I go back to this survey on children's health, and you're talking to a mother, and the mother has two children. And of course, like all children, they also have fallen sick from time to time. But she can't really remember how many times she had to take her two children to a doctor. But usually people are somewhat embarrassed to say, I don't remember. Right. So then they will do is, they will make up a number. So they will say, oh, maybe 3-4 times. The girl 3-4 times, the boy maybe 6 times. Now, the more, shall I say, these kind of approximations happen, the more contaminated your data becomes. And that's a problem. So what we do here is we try to, trigger the person's memory. So by saying that, okay, so can you remember when was the first time last year that your son got ill? And what was the illness? So then gradually her memory starts coming back. Ah, no, he had just a bad cough and cold. I didn't take him to a doctor, but I couldn't go to work. I had to stay with him for 2 days. So then you ask her, okay, so did you lose any wage because of that? Did they cut any money because you didn't go to work for 2 days? Ah, they scolded me. That's all. So then that's one way to go. Okay. So that's collection of primary data. And then once you have the data, then you put it in a structured format, typically in an Excel sheet. The more structured it is, the more easier it is to put in an Excel sheet. Okay. Now there is a kind of another kind of data which is called, this is all this what I have talked about now is cross-section data. Cross-section meaning it's a snapshot view. What is the picture today? Secondary is also a thing, snapshot. Primary is also snapshot. So it's cross-section data. Now, an alternative to cross-section data could be secondary data, which is time series in nature. Time series meaning what has this variable behaved over time. So typically, for example, stock market data is time series data. So you just look at the value of a stock over time. So the over time may be over a day. It may be a NASDAQ or Sensex over a week or a month or a year. And there are various methodologies in which you can study time series data. So you look at 2 columns. Okay. And so column X is going X1, X2, X3, X4, X5. Column Y is going Y1, Y2, Y3, Y4, Y5. And then you can do difference in difference. So subtract one from the other, subtract x2 from x1, y2 from y1, and create another column. So this is called stabilizing the data. And that yields much information and is amenable to a lot of statistical testing. Now, these are all the conventional ways of collecting data. Another kind of data that can be created is a hybrid of time series and cross section. So this is called panel data. So let me give an example from my own research. In the 90s, there was much talk about industrial sickness and why government-run companies become sick. So me and one of my research students, we did a study in which we looked at. We didn't go to any office, any government uh, company or anything like that. We just took the government report. The government report reports 213 companies, manufacturing companies. These are, and they are. We took their balance sheet for 9 years. So then we have one column in which uh, X goes from 1 to N. So that's 213. And we have another column that where Y goes from 1 to 9. So X1, 1 to 9, X2, again 1 to 9, X3, again 1 to 9, and so on for 213 companies. So this is how we collect the data, and we then interpret the data to find out, predict practically when a company becomes sick, because we draw a red line at the time that company became sick. Okay. So I'll just stop here for a moment and ask if anybody has any questions, because now I'm going to move into some relatively new territory.
Sir,
Hmm.
good evening, sir. Can you hear me?
Hmm.
Hello.
Hmm.
Uh,
Go on. Go on.
yeah, yes, sir. So you were talking about representative sample. So I wanted to ask, like, how to ensure, like, whether the sample is representative or not. So how to ensure that? So that's my question.
Okay. Uh, you see, you have to look at the relationship between the population and the sample. I'll give you an example. All students of Jadavpur University is a population. Okay. Now, it's impossible for you to interview or run a primary survey of all students of Jadavpur University. So, you have to classify them. You have to classify them. So, you may classify them by income, you may classify them by department, you may classify them by whether they are urban or rural. That depends on what your research focus is. Then you have to make sure, and this is the answer to your question, Jaggo Shetty, that your sample must contain the exact same proportion as in the population. So that is how stratification is done, so that you can the sample. Supposing Jadavpur University has 10,000 students, and you are going to only be able to survey maybe 500 or 1,000. So you make sure that in your sample there are the same proportion of people as they are in the population. Okay. Anybody else has a question?
Hello,
Excuse
sir.
me, sir.
Go on.
Uh,
Yeah, go.
so would you please once again repeat the difference between panel data and time series data?
Time series is one dimensional. Take stock market, for example. So you have 10 important stocks, shares, okay? And those are their value is going up and down by the minute. So that then you have one column which shows the variation in the value of these shares. So you have 10 such shares. So you have X1, X2, X3, X4, X5, X. So if it may be over a day, it may be over a week, it may be over a month, it may be an index like NASDAQ or Sensex, or it may be individual shares. And you can try to find out how far they are correlated, how one share is influencing another. So this is time series. It's only time. The movement of the variable is only over time. Panel, however, is where you observe a cross section over time. So again, going back to my example, and your name is Sharanya, is where we studied 213 central government owned companies over 9 years, their financial performance. So I have one column which is the number, we assign a number to a company. So company number 1, year number 1 to 9. Company number 2, year number 1 to 9. Company number 3, year number 1 to 9. This way 213 times. So this is panel data. Any other questions, or I'll move on?
Hello, sir.
Bolo?
Sir, you said something about stabilizing the data in longitudinal data. I didn't get what you were speaking. You were telling about stocks X1, X2, X3, and Y1, Y2, Y3, and then you told how we can stabilize it.
Anton,
Mm.
this is, there is a way to stabilize this,
Mm.
but it is
Mm.
very difficult for me to explain over an online class because there's some complicated statistics involved there. But just to give you a rough intuitive understanding, you see, supposing you have two columns
Mm.
of numbers. You have two columns. You have an X column and a Y column, and you have some numbers. Then you want to say, and these are time series numbers over time. So today, tomorrow, day after, like that. The average price of this share today, the average price of this share tomorrow. Then there is fluctuation. So you can take like X2 minus X1, X3 minus X2, X4 minus, so X1, X2, X3, X4, these are over few days. So you have 100 days. And Y1, Y2, Y3, Y4, another 100 days. So you take difference in difference. So you create a new column, which is X2 minus X1, X3 minus X2, X4 minus X3, like that. And similarly for Y.
Okay, sir.
You compare this, and that data is one level stabilized. You can do two level stabilization like that. So these are amenable or interpretable with various statistical tests. So these have to be done in order to do the, so there is Q sum test and Q sum squared test, but that's, some very advanced level material in the statistics class. So can't be done in 10, 15 minutes. Okay, so any more questions?
Can I?
Yeah, go
Sir,
on.
good evening. Sir, good evening. I don't know whether this question may sound a little amateurish, but so what are the most authentic sources to get data on country-wise GDP, per capita income, health expenditure, and data such as this?
World Bank. World Bank publishes these data. You just go to the World Bank site and you will get all these data. World Bank does, IMF does. In India, if you want state-wise, you go to census, you go to NSSO, National Sample Survey Organization. Then there's the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMI. And if you want international data, you go to World Bank, you go to IMF. This data is very easily available. Okay, let me move on because
Sir, relating to Bangladesh, if you sir, sir, relating to Bangladesh, if you want region-wise data, what would be the good sources, sir? If you kindly, if you write region-wise data like border areas and central Bangladesh, rural areas and urban areas.
They do it. Bangladesh does it district-wise. See, Bangladesh has very, very small districts. So Bangladesh is slightly bigger than West Bengal, but it has 50 districts.
Yes, sir.
They are 50 or 51 districts, I think they have now. So Bangladesh, you can. Why don't you visit the BIDS site, Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies? Professor Sobhan, who used to be director, was very thing about
Raman Shobhan, sir.
Raman Sobhan. Huh?
Yes.
When he was director, he took a great initiative in putting all this data together and then keeping it. I think the you go to the BIDS site first, and I think that will help you if you're interested in Bangladesh.
Thank you, sir.
Mhm. Okay, I'm assuming that we have covered some questions so far. So the few minutes that are left, I think the Google Meets, they have a time limit. So I will talk about two more ways of collecting data that are of very recent vintage, very recent. And I think the girl who introduced me also mentioned experimental economics. Now, there is this lot of mumbo jumbo about what is this experimental economics, whether this is science or what's going on. Experimental economics is what I called active observation, which is different from collecting primary data through passive observation. In passive observation, you make sure that you don't let the person being observed be aware of the fact that the person is being observed. That's no contamination. Whereas in active observation, so let me give you an example of what experimental data collection is all about. There's a lot of, even today, even in the year 2021, even though an experimental economist was given the Nobel Prize for his work, Vernon Smith, in the year 2002, many senior economists still hold a lot of doubt about whether experiments are a valid way of gathering data. So when do we resort to experiments? We resort to experiments when we are investigating that aspect of human behavior. And I'm sorry, this is a bit, there'll be a lot of economics into it. But I mean, you'll get the drift. Am I boring you? People are leaving the meeting. Tell me when you are bored.
No, sir. It's
No, sir.
wonderful, sir. It's
Not
wonderful, sir.
No, sir.
I see people are leaving the meeting. Oh no, she's come back. Okay. She must have left by accident. Okay. So what is experiment? Supposing I have a theory. The theory is trusting societies grow faster. Do you follow? A society in which people generally trust each other, they grow faster.
So is it social capital in any way, sir?
No. It's just a cultural thing. Aha, it's saying my internet connection is not stable. What is wrong? Anyway, I'll try to quickly wrap this up because I get a message which says your internet connection is unstable. So, anyway, let me quickly wrap this up. So, not social capital. Social capital is something else. This is where, generally, let me take a minute to tell you a story. This is my second visit to Sweden. Okay. This is my second visit to Sweden. I was told to get off at the airport and call a particular number, a car will come and pick me up, which I did. In the process, the pocketbook which contained my passport, my visa, my phone book, I left in the phone kiosk. And I went straight to the car. Once I was loading my luggage in the car, I realized that I had left my pocketbook back. Now, if you are without your passport in a foreign country, you are really, really in a bad shape. And everything, my passport, my insurance letter, everything was in that book, in that bag. So I run back, and I find that kiosk is empty. When I hear an an announcement over the intercom. In a very foreign accent, they are pronouncing my name, Gautam Gupta, Gautam Gupta. Please report here. So I go to that desk and they have my bag. Okay, this first part of the story. And that is the bag is intact, including the dollars that I had. Next day when I join work and my colleagues take me to lunch, I tell them this story. I tell them that, I did something very stupid yesterday. I left my bag with everything, all my documents in a phone booth, but I got it back like this. So my colleagues were surprised, not because I got my bag back, but because I thought it was a story fit to tell. In Sweden, this is supposed to happen. So there is this culture in which, if you leave an umbrella in a railway station, it will still be there or it will be in the station master's office. So such societies actually grow faster. Okay? Trusting societies. Now, how do you measure trust? This is a good question. So what we do in experimental economics is we design a game. And we use real money, mind you. So what is this trust game? This is another way of collecting data. And I have in my book called it active observation, which is different from passive observation, which is like a survey. Right? So what is a trust game? You have player A and player B. And you make them sit in a room where they know that there is another person on the other side. There's a screen, but they can't see each other. This is to prevent any verbal or non-verbal communication. Then you give them 100 rupees each. Then you ask player A whether he or she would like to give some money to player B from his or her endowment of 100 rupees. See how I'm measuring trust. We actually don't give the money first. We give the money at the end. We give a piece of paper in which they have to write. Then whatever money player A is willing to give to player B is then multiplied 2 or 3 times and given over to player B. Then you ask player B, again through a piece of paper, would you like to give some money back? And player B writes. And whatever happens, that actual money is paid to them. So you are now trusting a person you have never seen or never met. Now, if you go by Präsenzdilemma and Nash equilibrium, and please look up Nash equilibrium on Wikipedia. I don't have the time now to explain Nash equilibrium. The solution is player A knows that player B will move last. Correct? And so if the player B doesn't give nothing back, there's nothing a player A can do about it. So the solution to this is player A will give nothing to player B and player B will give nothing back to player A. So each of them will go home with 100 rupees. Social optimum is player A will give the whole of 100 rupees to player B. And so that becomes 300 rupees. And player B already has 100 rupees. And player B, being a trustworthy person, will give half of that back to player A. So both of them go back home with 200 rupees each. So we actually have people play this game with real money. Okay? And you can read my papers in the Journal of Economics and Business Organization. We played this, somebody talked about Bangladesh, Abhishek. We played this game in Sundarbans, Indian Sundarbans, and in the Bangladesh Sundarbans. And trust is a very important factor in the Sundarbans because, you have to plant mangroves to protect the Sundarbans. But there has to be inter-community trust. Because you plant mangroves, you take care of them, and then somebody who is starved of fuel comes and cuts it and takes it away. So trust is very important. Anyway, let me spend the last few minutes talking about the last kind of data gathering process that has come up recently, and that is called RCT, randomized control trials. Now, you have all heard of my junior in school, Abhijit Binayak Banerjee, and his wife Esther Duflo, who got the Nobel Prize a couple of years back. Yes. So, what they are famous for, and you should actually read their book called Poor Economics. What they are famous for, they use a methodology called RCT, which is randomized control trials, which is very simple. It's an idea borrowed from the medical sciences. How do you test a medicine? Once you have, developed through research some medicine that is supposed to address uh, some disease, then you find some people, and there's usually a volunteer sign up program, who are diagnosed with that disease. Is not that trust game an example of game theory? Well, trust game is not an example of game theory in the sense that the results of the trust game, standard game theory is John Nash and Nash equilibrium. But we have found that our results often violate Nash's equilibrium. So yeah, it uses the format of game theory, but it does not follow Nash. Not always. In fact, practically never. Okay, let me just quickly finish up here. These RCTs, randomized control trials, in which what you do is you take a sample of people that you are interested in studying, and you divide them into a random half. First of all, you got to know that something is about to happen, and you have to build in some element of experiment into one half and not build it into the other half. Right. So let me talk about Abhijit and Esther's early work on reservation of seats in panchayats for women. And they did a study in which they supported, so they took like maybe 2,000 women candidates, and they supported about 1,000 of them in very small ways. Giving some, helping them to give supplementary nutritional doses to their constituents. And to the others, they just gave leaflets, only advice, no actual stuff. And then they studied how many of them were re-elected. Okay, so this is randomized control trials, and you can generate data like this. Okay, I think I'll stop here. We have just about 5 minutes of our time left. So any quick questions I can take?
Sir, just wanted to clarify one confusion of mine, sir. Actually,
very quickly, because there are two other people who want to ask questions.
yes, sir. Actually, sir, I have come across some of the papers written by Professor Carol Rackerty, who has worked on religion and development in International Development Program, University of Birmingham. In her multiple of her writings, she tried to find out the relation between religiosity and development, and over there she multiple times have used the word trust. That trust within a religious community increases the amount of social capital. She has used this term. And that's why, so obviously it helps in development, and sometimes so antagonistically as well. So sir, just wanted to clarify what did she mean by that, sir?
You see, actually the word trust has multiple meanings. Now,
Yes, sir.
When you form a community, see, the economics and sociology of religion is a vast literature now.
Yes, sir.
It's impossible for me to even go into it, but just to cut it short, thing is that in order to, it's like forming a club. if you want to join a club and play carom, you should be able to do it in a relaxed manner, right? And in order to do it in a relaxed manner, you need to be able to trust the other members of the club. Okay, so let me shut you down there, and Auditro and Jagoshani. Jagoshani first.
Yes, sir. So my question was regarding experimental economics, that active observation. So in social sciences, we have this term called Hawthornes Effect, or the social desirability bias, where the researcher's presence kind of influence the participants' behavior, basically. So, sir, how does experimental economics deal with this issue?
Well, this is a good question actually, because when experimental economics started, it was done mostly by economics professors, and they started as subjects using economics department students. Now, when the investigating person is your direct professor, there is a tendency for the subject to try and please. So we have now thought of various ways in which the investigator and the subject may be removed from each other. So you may use a research assistant, somebody that the subjects don't know, and you may think of use two levels of separation, in which you train some people who then train some people from another department who go and conduct the experiment. So these are very technical terms. Jagoshani, if you can spare 250 rupees,
Yes, sir.
please read my book. It's called Introduction to Experimental Economics. It's all explained.
Okay, sir. Thank
It's all
you.
explained. I think we are running.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Time. I will take one more question from Aritro. Go on, Aritro.
Yes, sir. Sorry, my question is not directly related to today's lecture. I'm sorry about that. But I just wanted to clarify that I once heard someone describe Yuval Noah Harari. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Hmm?
He's a historian. He once described that the primary economic question, the most basic economic question of all, is trust. How do we get people to trust each other? People who don't know each other, maybe. And since you talked a lot about trust today, I just wanted to get your opinion on that, because as someone who's an outsider to economics, I found it very intriguing and also very compelling. I just wanted to get your opinion on it as the medium.
It's like this. I just have a minute, so I will quickly tell you, give you an example. Supposing you are in a railway station waiting for a train, long distance train, right? And
Yes, sir.
the gentleman next to you is also standing waiting for the long distance train to be put in the platform. Now, this gentleman tells you that, see, why trust is contextual. It's very much contextual. Gentleman tells you, sir, can you please look after my bag? I need to go to the toilet. Now, it may be a very innocent request. At the same time, it may be that the bag contains cocaine and he is seeing some policeman approaching. So he will quietly slip out the bag and you will be caught with the bag. So I have tried this out in my class. Most students say, I will not take responsibility of the bag. Okay. Now,
Yes, sir.
scenario number two, you both board the train and you find yourselves opposite each other. And then you start chatting, and where are you going and why are you going and how many children do you have, that kind of thing. And then the same question, the man says, I need to go to the toilet. Can you please look after my bag? This time he will look after the bag. Yes? So it's
Yes, sir.
I think we'll have to shut shop here. No? Mr. Dana, what do you say? Otendrio? Yeah? Who is responsible here?
Onisha?
Anisha. Okay, Anisha? Yes. How does this work? Should I just leave the meeting or how does this work? Okay, thank you everybody.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.